How's it going, guys? Bunny Slippers episode number 2, wobble up a dub dub. So I think most people who've been playing video games for at least 10 years have noticed something of a steady decline in quality game design, particularly in the AAA market. A lot of people will attribute the reason why people like older games to nostalgia, and while that's true to a certain extent, I think, broadly speaking, when we look at older games, there's just this purer game design, purer quality game design that a lot of people really like. And it's something that you might not necessarily be able to put your finger on, but it's something that is noticeable in terms of, I guess, the different feel that you see in a lot of older games. And I think part of that is because the standards for game design were higher. And I'm going to talk about why I don't think they're as high anymore, but you look at games of old, and I'm talking, you know, like 15, 20, 30 years ago even, and the steady improvement that we saw in games as technology improved and developers took advantage of new hardware. We saw the transition from fairly crappy visuals to real quality art design. A lot of great visual styles that sort of evolved in the transition to 8-bit and 16-bit. The improvements in terms of larger levels, more sprawling, open-ended levels. The move to 3D was pretty revolutionary and really opened up gaming. And there are a lot of genres that kind of wouldn't exist without that innovation. And while we really haven't seen any similar innovation in terms of technology like that since, even as the time progressed, you know, from the PlayStation and the N64 coming into the PS2, Xbox, and GameCube, we just saw so many genre-defining games, these amazing experiences, and there's a reason why a lot of people think the 6th generation, or in particular the PS2, is the best console of all time, myself included. And you just look at those games, and it was just so much fun, so well designed. And that's something that I can't say with as much confidence anymore when looking at the AAA gaming market. It's less so with indie games because you see a lot of innovation there. But when it comes to big titles, the kind of titles that they want to sell to casual gamers, people who aren't super active in it, people who aren't very skilled, and the people who kind of comprise the largest possible market that you can sell a product to, in the push for gaining market share in this demographic, I think has contributed to the decline we've seen in game design, particularly over the last 5 or so years. Gaming is no longer a novelty. It's a huge market. It generates more revenue than the film industry. However, seeing as big budget titles cost millions to produce, the pursuit of a broader market is kind of key to the business strategy of major publishers. There are very few publishers who are trying to make something that appeals to a limited demographic because it's bad business. The game's not going to sell. But unfortunately, mass market appeal and simplicity go hand in hand. Don't believe me? You know, turn on your radio and tell me that the shit you hear is actually quality music. In gaming, the reduction of complexity in a game is commonly referred to as streamlining. It's a fancy word for dumbing down, and I think most gamers are aware of this because I don't think I'm the only person who, watching a developer interview when they say, oh, you know, we really wanted to streamline the game, I'm not the only person who's going, ah, shit, because we all know what that means. Alas, gaming journalists often cite streamlining as a positive, even though it very clearly isn't in most cases. And we can thank them for making it a popular thing. The dumbing down of games can be seen in many different facets of game design. Less sprawling levels, very linear game design, bare bones customizability, particularly in a lot of mainstream RPGs. Some of these RPGs can barely even be classified as RPGs, but the way I see it, a skill tree is not a substitute for an actual RPG system with classes. Probably the most obvious thing that we've seen more recently is flat out easier difficulty across the majority of major titles. And this really perturbs me because I find that most games released are too easy now, and it's been this way for years. I can play through a lot of major console games and never die, or count the number of times I died on one hand, and extremely lenient checkpoints really don't help the matter. You get into situations where you die in an area, one combat area, and just start that area over again. Takes 5 minutes to beat it, and now you've completely cleared that area, you're set for the next area because the checkpoint's already been reset. no punishment for death. Of course, I can understand that brutally punishing players for failing can be very annoying, like if there's no checkpoints at all, but there has to be some penalty. And most games really don't have it. Like I said, you die in a specific combat area, you just start in the same area. It's not a big deal. And the way I see it, for a video game to be fun or engaging or entertaining, it needs to be challenging. Video games are distinctly different from all other forms of media in the sense that they have a fail state. Yeah, I think one of the core defining aspects of a video game is that you can fail. If you can't fail, it's not a video game. Even if the consequences of failure are extremely lenient or nearly non-existent, there has to be a possibility of screwing something up and having to try again. That's the entire incentive of play, and that just forms the bedrock of an interactive experience. Because if it's interactive, but you can't fail, you can't screw anything up at all, you're basically just playing an interactive movie. And if you're playing, for example, a combat-focused game where you can't die, then there's no point in even playing. You might as well put down the controller, because if you can't die, then there's no point in playing. It's very difficult to explain in a very simplistic manner that a video game has to allow you to fail, but we all know this. Video games have fail states, and if we understand this, there has to be a degree of challenge to all video games, and frankly, not everybody is as competent at playing video games as more active gamers are. Video games are the only entertainment product that cannot be completed if you are too incompetent to do it. You know, everybody can watch any movie or any TV show or read any book, even if they don't really understand or appreciate the subtext or the more complex nature of a story. You know, a 3-year-old kid can read 1984 and not get it at all. They didn't really get anything from it. But at the very least, they can still read it in its entirety. Whereas you compare that to a video game where, for example, Dark Souls, that's a game that not everybody can beat. Some people will never be able to beat it. They just aren't good enough. They don't have good enough hand-eye coordination. They aren't really learning it. They aren't getting it. And so you're presented with a situation that's unlike any other, where a person can get something that they cannot beat, which makes it distinctly different from all other forms of media. But because of that, I think it's important to realize that the actual difficulty of a game, its complexity, and the actual gameplay itself forms an integral part of the game. And that when you try and neuter it and you try to water it down to make it easier for other people to play, you're compromising the quality of the whole experience. Difficulty is part of the experience. It is key to gameplay. It's a key pillar of gameplay. And to suggest that it isn't that important or that it should be watered down for accessibility's sake, I find to be pretty ridiculous. This is the reason why I always go, oh, fucking hell, when a developer says something like, we want to cater to as many people as possible. No. When you cater to everybody, you ultimately cater to nobody. You have to accept that some people will not like or may not get or simply may not be good enough to complete your product. That's how it is. You can't please everybody. And in the pursuit to please a fairly casual demographic that isn't even guaranteed to buy your game at the expense of loyal, long-time fans of a franchise, for example, who you're screwing over in the pursuit of a market that may not even give a fuck about the game that you're making, is kind of a dumb business sense. It doesn't make any sense from a pragmatic standpoint. There is no world where you can please both old school Halo fans and new Halo fans. The games are too different, and no matter what middle ground you try to find, it won't cut it. There is no compromise between sprint and no sprint. They are mutually exclusive. There is no common ground between open-ended complex levels and linear levels. They are not the same. Creating a game that's both accessible and deep is ridiculously hard. The only example I can think of in recent memory that achieved this was Overwatch. It's simplistic enough that people can understand it and start playing it, but it's got enough complexity in terms of the characters and the way that you can combine characters in teams and the objectives that it sort of lends it more of a higher skill ceiling for people who get invested in it. But in most instances, we don't see that. Most of the time, we see a push for the casual demographic, which means reducing the skill floor and generally that's achieved by making the game less complex and capping the skill ceiling so that in, for example, a multiplayer game, nobody feels like they're getting their ass whooped too badly. Prime example, Call of Duty. Easily accessible, very low skill ceiling. And let's get real, modern Call of Duty games are diluted as fuck. They are just so bland, so devoid of substance in this push for a casual audience and this push for accessibility. The series has lost a lot of its core defining traits, and many of the stupid design decisions that they made recently, masqueraded as adding complexity, have all they've done is serve to reduce the complexity of multiplayer in Call of Duty games, making it harder to stay alive for longer and easier for everybody to get kills but nobody to do exceptionally well. It is a toxic attitude in game design. I think this is part of the reason why a lot of people really like a lot of these especially challenging indie games, you know, these ball-crushing indie games, and why people in the AAA sphere have enjoyed games like Dark Souls so much. There's a good appeal in a game that's hard, like really hard, where you have to learn the mechanics to succeed. It's not that these games are unfair, though sometimes we get instances like that, like I want to be the fucking guy, but in good circumstances with games that are challenging but fair, it really encourages people to get invested into that game and dig deep, learn the mechanics, and succeed. And it's way more rewarding. You know, when you play a game that's super easy and you get through it and you barely die, you can count the number of times you died on one hand. Sure, you had fun, but it wasn't exactly riveting, it wasn't super challenging, and it wasn't engaging because you didn't feel like there was a possibility of messing up and having to retry over and over and over. It just feels like a breeze. Whereas you compare that to fighting a really difficult boss, like for example, Chairman's Wreck in the first Ratchet & Clank game. When you finally beat that dude, it feels great because it was actually hard. You can't get that feeling of satisfaction in what you did as a player if you're playing a game that holds your hand and more or less beats the boss for you. Like, think about it this way, what feels better? If you run like an obstacle course and you beat it and you did it all on your own and it was really hard and you hurt, but it was great, or one where every time you get to an obstacle, like a robot punches down the brick wall and says, all right, ladies first, go ahead. I'm gonna get flack for that joke. What I hope we see moving forward is the push for less accessibility, less inclusivity in terms of the way that games are designed, because I think that all games should commit to, this is the game that we want to play. If you don't like it or it's too hard for you, tough shit. This is the game that we're making. Instead of trying to dumb down your mechanics and alienating the fans you already have in the pursuit of people who may not be interested in your game anyway, keep on adding to the complexity, like push the boundaries, make it more challenging, add in those extra features. Don't dilute the experience for the sake of accessibility or streamlining. It's just dumb. I'm not saying that I dislike a lot of these new games. I mean, some of them I do dislike, but a lot of them I find to be fairly enjoyable. It's just that I feel that there would be a lot more to like about certain games if they were more challenging. Instead of pursuing accessibility and trying to make something for everybody, make a game that's rewarding and challenging. Besides, I don't think little Timmy is supposed to be playing a game where you relentlessly murder thousands of people indiscriminately while having a shit-eating grin across your face. Ba 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 ba. Ba 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 ba.